Hi, I'm Paige, and this is my sister Gianna, and we are going to read the prologue and chapter 1 of Maleficent by Elizabeth Rudnick. You start.
Late afternoon sun filtered across a wide expanse of thick grass, turning the green blades golden in the sky. Clouds moved slowly, their unhurried movements mimicking the fluffy white sheep in the field below. Sitting on a nearby stone wall, a shepherd and his 4-year-old son kept watch over the flock. At their feet sat 2 collies, their eyes closed as they relaxed from their watchdog duties for a moment. This was the young boy's first trip to the pastures with his father. He had waited for this day forever, always the one left behind while his brothers took the flocks farther and farther afield. But now it was his turn. He had run behind his father the whole way, trying not to scare the sheep when they finally found them at the back of one of their farthest fields. Then he had hooted and hollered, mimicking his followers as best as he could to make the furry creatures move on. With all the new experiences and all the running and yelling, the boy had worked up quite the appetite. Supper had been quickly devoured, and now he took a big bite of his sweet cake. Crumbs fell onto his lap as he enjoyed the treat. Noticing his father had placed his own treat on the ground next to him, the young boy cocked his head. "You don't want your sweet cake, Papa?" he asked. "I'm leaving it there for the fair folk," the shepherd answered, his weathered face serious. Wasting a treat? The young boy had never heard of such a thing. "Why?" he asked. Smiling at his son's inquisitive nature, the father answered, "To thank them for making the grass grow tall and helping the flowers bloom, to show that we mean them no harm." But that was not enough of an answer for the boy. He had more questions. "Why do they do that? What would we harm them for?" he asked, his tiny voice full of confusion. Before saying anything, the shepherd smoothed the dirt beneath him with his worn boot. The soles were brown in the earth of the field, and the tips were faded. Times had been tough of late, with King Henry demanding more and more of their crops and sheep every year. Things like boots, hope, and dirt were what the farmer held on to tight now. They're part of nature. They take to the plants, the animals, even the air itself. He went on and scooped up a handful of loose dirt and slowly made a dirt wreath around the tree. But not all humans appreciate them. Some people attack their land, wanting to reap the benefits of all their natural resources. There have been many pointless wars between greedy humans and the fair folk. And no matter how many times both sides strive for peace, we always seem to be on the brink of another. The shepherd looked into the distance wistfully. This was too much for the boy to handle. His father was talking gibberish whenever he had silly things. His mother would cuff him upside the head and send him out to the barn to clean the stalls. But since he couldn't do that to his own father, he just said, "Why are you doing that with the dirt?" "It is a sign of respect," the father answered matter-of-factly. "We want the fair folk to know it is safe for them to eat it. We don't want them thinking we've tried to poison them. Fairies can be quite mean if they are provoked." Standing up, he whistled to the dogs and began to walk home. Behind him, the boy sat on the wall, his mind racing. He's never heard of mean fairies. Looking nervously over his shoulder, he scanned the large wall. Not satisfied that he wasn't being watched by mean fairies, he jumped off the stones. Then, uttering a soft cry, he raced after his father. When he was safely by his father's side, the boy let out a relieved sigh. He began to look around the field, eager to catch the sight of one of the fair folk. As they moved down the hill, herding the sheep toward their farmhouse, which was just a spot in the distance, the young boy peered up at the sky and down at the ground. Spotting something green on a nearby flower, he stopped and pointed out to his father. "Is that one of the fair folk?" he asked hopefully. The shepherd shook his head. "No," he answered. "That's a grasshopper." Pointing at another flower, the boy once asked again, "Is that one?" Once again, the shepherd shook his head. "No, that's a dragonfly," he said, realizing that until he gave his son more information, there would be many more questions. The shepherd added, "Not all of the fair folk are small. Some are as big as we are. Some have wings and some don't, but they all have pointy ears." Reaching up, the boy nubbed his own ears. His eyes grew wide. "Papa," he shouted, "I think I'm one." Stifling a chuckle, the shepherd stopped and turned toward his son. "Let me see those ears," he said gently, examining the boy's head. "No, not pointy." Then he turned his son around, and "No wings either. You're just a boy." The son smiled, relieved. While he wanted to see one of the magical creatures, he definitely did not want to be one. Raising a finger, the shepherd pointed to the land that bordered their family's grazing fields. "If you were one of them," the boy's father went on, "you'd live in there. That's the moors where the fairies live. That's what all the fuss is about." The boy's gaze followed his father's finger, and his eyes grew large. He had never seen the moors before. Their farmhouse was too far away, but he had heard his brothers talk about sheep wandering in and never returning. Even in the warm glow of afternoon light, the moors were covered in mist, hiding anything or anyone who walked upon them. They stretched out in both directions with tall trees that twisted and turned toward the sky, concealing the land beyond. At the base of the trunks, cattails grew tall in the dappling sunshine, stretching out toward the human land, as though they were curious. The little boy shivered. Turning his attention once more to the sheep, the shepherd resumed his walk down the hill. Behind him, the boy lingered, his eyes glued to the moors. He could just make out food on the ground, along with totems and talismans that swung from the branches of the trees that edged the fairyland. Squinting, he tried to make out more through the mist. Unable to, and overcome with curiosity, the boy began walking toward the misty glen. Moments later, he found himself at the edge of the moors, the mist clearing around him enough that he could make out the rocks and small shrubs that covered the ground. Kneeling down, he reached into his pocket and cautiously placed his half-eaten sweet cake on a rock. Impatiently, he grabbed a fistful of dirt and spattered it around the rock. He took a step back and waited. Nothing happened. The boy nudged the cake closer to the center of the rock. Still nothing happened. Disappointed, the boy turned to go. The sun would be setting at any moment, and he needed to return home with his father. Suddenly, he heard a soft fluttering sound behind him. The boy stopped. Turning back around slowly, he watched with wide eyes as a pair of small insect-like antennae rose over the rock's edge. Quickly, the young boy ducked behind a nearby stone, his heart racing and his breath coming in short gasps. The antennae quivered as if testing the air. A moment later, two tiny blue wings came into view, and then a brilliant blue fairy climbed onto the rock. Her skin was almost iridescent, like a dewdrop, and her colorful wings were mesmerizing. As they fluttered behind her, she was the most beautiful thing the boy had ever seen. Unaware that she had company, the tiny fairy reached out toward the sweet cake. Behind his stone, the boy felt his nose twitch. He wiggled it, trying to prevent the inevitable. But there was nothing he could do. He sneezed. Spinning around, the fairy locked eyes with the young boy. For a moment, neither of them moved, each in awe of the other. But then there was a loud bark, and one of the collies bounded over. Before the boy could say a word, the fairy flew off, leaving the sweet cake behind. With a sigh, the boy stood up and began to walk away from the moors, his mind racing with thoughts and questions. What kind of fairy had that been? Was she young or old? Was she nice or mean? Were there many more like her? Most important, where was she going?
Chapter 1. The Blue Dew Fairy flew quickly away from the young boy with his frightening furry creature. As she made her way farther and farther into the moors, the sun set farther and farther into the horizon, releasing hues of brilliant pinks, purples, and blues. The sky grew darker and the sound of nature became louder. There were the hoots of owls, the cawing of crows, and the buzzing drone of bugs as they went from flower to flower. Behind her, the trees that provided a natural barrier to her world faded into the distance, but bigger, older ones came into view. Their trunks ranged in color from dark brown to light gray. They rose high into the sky, creating a canopy that provided a roof of sorts for the moors below. Within the canopy, birds called to one another while squirrels raced from branch to branch, undaunted by the height. The fairy moved quickly along. She passed a large pond where a group of fairies splashed out, sending water droplets glittering into the air. Waving, she continued on. Flying up over a hill and down through a small glen, she veered to the right at the large tree that was split into two, and made her way through a field of bright red flowers that stretched out on for nearly 10 tree lengths. Beyond that was another pond, this one murkier, with a dark cave at the end that was a home to a family of mudgeons. She ducked her head so as not to make eye contact, the tiny creatures with their big ears and foreheads that were always wrinkled, as they tended to worry about everything, were sweet, but they were a bit too relaxed into their housekeeping for her taste. The dew fairy's wings beat faster and faster. Finally, she arrived in a beautiful wooded grove, the fairy mound. In the very heart of the moors, the mound was a special place to all who lived there. Imbued with magic, the fairy mound practically pulsed with energy drawn from the creatures and flora that inhabited it. Naturally circular, it consisted of large peat bogs, several small streams, and taking up the most room, a large tree that sat perched above everything. Landing on a small rock on the edge of a bog, the dew fairy looked around and smiled, happy to be home and see so many familiar faces. There were a grunt of Wallerbog as he sank. There was the grunt of a Wallerbog as he sank his ungainly body into the muddy bog to join several others. The creatures all had long, pointy ears that hung out from the sides of their heads, and thick antennae fringed with pink. Together they sat, their slobber dripping into the bog, creating more mud, which helped it survive. Farther down from the bog, purple fish-like creatures with huge eyes and large mouths filtered dirty water through their net-like fins, making it fresh and clean once more. Nearby, a group of stone fairies, hairless creatures that looked like the rocks they worked with, kept them busy arranging stones in the now clean stream to help the water flow. Everywhere in the wooded grove, the creatures worked together to keep nature balanced and in harmony. In the middle of it all sat the rowan tree, enormous and stately, the tree's trunk twisted up into a thick, long branch and down into a mossy maze of perfectly curled roots. Shiny leaves covered the branches, and when the moon caught them just right, they cast a green light that shone through the grove. Sitting against the sturdy trunk was a beautiful human-sized fairy, her baby cradled in one arm. The fairy's raven-colored hair shone in the moonlight, and her expansive wings gracefully rested over both of them, like a feathered blanket. She hummed a lullaby and raised one hand above her, making night blossoms suddenly unfurl on the branches overhead. Then she made the leaves and the flowers dance, swaying to keep the tune of her song. As her daughter was lulled to sleep, Hermia called a warm voice behind her. Suddenly a tall, handsome fairy appeared by her side. It was her husband, Lysander, his green eyes gleaming as brightly as the stars above them. "Shh," she chided gently. "She's fast asleep." "Ah, that she is." He smiled and tilted his head back, basking in the vision of his sleeping beauty. He bent down to kiss his daughter on the forehead and embraced his wife. "How did it go?" she asked, once he'd settled in next to her against the rowan tree. He sighed, his brow furrowing into a frown. "It didn't. The humans did not come. I waited at the border until sunset, and then headed back." Hermia mulled over this information, knowing the implications of one more day lost in their efforts for peace. Though most fair folk distrusted all humans, having witnessed countless attacks initiated by their kind, Lysander and Hermia believed that they could not judge a whole species on the actions of few, that peace between the races was possible. In fact, for years they had forged relationships with local farmers and shepherds. These folks were proof that there were humans who appreciated nature just as much as they did. In fact, the seeds for their home, the rowan tree, had come as a gift from a family who'd thanked them for helping with their crops after a drought. And with just a touch of their magical coaxing, they had turned the seeds into their splendid abode, a piece of nature revered by all of the creatures in the moors, despite its origins. However, it seemed their new fragile harmony with humans, as delicate as a twig, was in danger of snapping. Centuries, the 12-foot-tall tree-like creatures who guarded the border had alerted the fair folk that humans in armor had been poking around the area, which greatly alarmed most of the other fairies. They thought this was a sure sign of a new batch of humans looking to invade and drain the moors of its riches, the start of a new war. Hoping to break the long-standing cycle of violence, Lysander had decided to go to the border to initiate peace talks. "What did Balthazar make of it?" Hermia asked, referencing one of the towering border guards. He was concerned. "They have been coming to the great waterfall every day at the same time for a week. It is strange they suddenly stopped their visits. Hermia didn't respond. The silence was thick between them, but they knew what was on the other's mind. The foolish hope that perhaps these humans had merely wanted to explore the moors, or what if their mission was malicious? They had abandoned it. The fear that they had missed the opportunity to change the course of history, to change and create a peaceful environment in which their daughter would grow, the undeniable foreboding tension in the air. Tomorrow, Lysander said, breaking the silence. I will return tomorrow. And I will go with you, Hermia added. I need to be there. Maleficent will be in good hands here with the others. A mild wind breezed through their branches. Hermia rested her head on Lysander's shoulder. He rested his head on hers. And with that, despite the heaviness in their hearts, they joined their daughter in a calm sleep under the rustling leaves of the rowan tree. They heard the screeching birds first, then the screaming. War! We're at war! A stone fairy cried. The humans have attacked, a water fairy yelled. Both Hermia and Lysander jumped up, their wings unfurling instinctively. It was still nighttime, and the sky was now a starless black. Fairies and animals alike raced around the leaf-covered land, through the burbling streams, in the velvety air. Hermia looked down at the precious bundle in her arms. Surprisingly, the chaos had not awoken Maleficent. 3 disheveled pixies flew past them in a hurry. What's happened? Hermia stood in front of them, blocking their way. The humans are here, at the border, a whole army of them. One called Knotgrass shouted hysterically. With weapons, said a pixie in blue, named Flittle. And ugly outfits, added the smallest, Thistlewit. Her eyes worried, Hermia turned to Lysander as the pixies flew away. There still may be time. Lysander answered her unspoken question. If we can just reason with them. Yes, Hermia agreed hurriedly. We need to go get the border. We need to get to the border. She held the sleeping infant closer in to her as they flew down the lush area directed underneath the rowan tree. Searching the mossy inlet, they started calling their friends' names. Adela, Finch, Sweet Pea, Robin, Hermia cried as she saw the small, sprightly fairy buzzing toward them. Robin had been a family friend for ages. With a childlike spirit, he was always good at telling silly jokes or coming up with games, a much-needed ray of brightness and positivity during the dark times that too often plagued the moors. That night, his elf-like features formed a grave expression. It was the most serious they had ever seen him. There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. We have, he announced when he reached them. The burrow over yonder is acting as a safe haven for those not fighting. Come on, this way, if you please. He started to fly in the direction from which he'd come. No, Hermia stopped him. Please, we want Maleficent to go with you to safe haven, but we will not. We're heading to the front lines, Lysander explained. Robin looked at them for a moment, then he nodded. He knew about their long-standing efforts to initiate peace, and how much it would mean to them to stop fighting for good. Arguing with them would only waste time. All right, then, he replied, but follow me to the burrow on your way there. Don't think I could hold her myself. The fairies flew, single file, silent amid the loud disorder around them. Only when Maleficent was kissed by her parents, gently placed into the cozy burrow, and surrounded by a melange of colorful creatures cooing over her, did any of them speak. Thank you, Lysander said to Robin meaningfully. We'll be back as soon as we can. Then he and Hermia swiftly took off into the black night once more, heading towards the loud noises and flashing lights at the border, until they looked like small ravens soaring in the sky. As soon as they were out of sight, Robin turned to look at the resting baby, her lips slightly parted, her stomach moving with every sleepy wave of breath. She did not know her parents had just flown off into danger so that the moors could thrive once more. Keep sleeping, love, he whispered to her. We'll look after you. That's chapter 1. Thanks.